Hello everybody, my name is Carbunny, and welcome back to my overview of Super Smash Bros. Melee's debug menu. I'm not exactly striking while the iron's hot, am I? Part 1 is, what, 4 years old at this point, and Melee celebrated its 20th anniversary last fall? This video and its theoretical sequels are only appropriate for this increasingly niche audience. I realize that, but I wanted to take another crack at this project and see if I could actually finish it off. Plus, I still get the occasional question about how to do something in the debug menu, so I know there are at least a few people out there who will get something out of all of this. With that, let's get started. At the end of Part 1, I said Part 2 would focus on the special fighters accessible through the CHAR Select submenu. And I'd rather not make a liar out of my past self. Seriously, that poor guy has been through enough already. So we're going to follow through with that plan. Today we're going to take a look at the mechanics of the Wireframes, Giga Bowser, Master Hand, CREZYH Hand, and, everyone's favorite masochist, Sandbag. I think we should start off with the Wireframes, since their mechanics are fairly straightforward. The CHAR Select submenu uses abbreviated names for most of the characters, so you aren't going to find an entry for male wireframe or female wireframe in here. Instead, you'll want to look for the entries for boy, which is the male wireframe, and girl, which is the female wireframe. Thanks for keeping it so straightforward, Hal. As many of you already know, the male and female wireframes are discount clones of Captain Falcon and Zelda, respectively. They use the same skeleton and animations, although they're much larger, floatier, and generally weaker. You're in for a huge disappointment if you try to punish a shield break with a patented wireframe punch, since the B button doesn't do anything for either of the wireframes. On top of lacking special moves, they have weaker versions of their counterparts' basic attacks and cannot charge their smash attacks. Overall, these two are trash-tier joke characters in the vast majority of circumstances. I suppose that's why they prefer to find strength in numbers. If you want additional in-depth details on how the wireframes stack up against the rest of the cast in terms of frame data and such, I recommend this Fighting Game Garbage video by Big Yellow. I'll throw a link into the description. The wireframes aren't going to win any major tournaments anytime soon, but I think they're fun to use just for the novelty. Their designs are super slick and emblematic of Melee's eerie, semi-cyberspace aesthetic. I like to bring them into some of the more colorful stages and savor the drastic contrast. They're already super cool under normal circumstances, but the idea of them outright invading other worlds takes them to a whole new level. Oh look, I won! I can't wait to get back to the menu and set up another... Oh. Right. The larger problem with the wireframes, and other non-standard fighters in general, is the game's tendency to shit itself whenever one of them wins a battle. They don't have victory poses, which means Melee's already shaky, developed in 13 months foundation collapses whenever it tries to render the results screen. There is an action replay code that supposedly prevents post-match crashes by replacing every character's internal ID with Mario's. I would say the code solves the issue at the expense of making the HUD a little less interesting, but I can't even get it to work properly. Whenever I use it, it just outright turns every character into Mario. I'm not sure how to troubleshoot action replay codes, so I'll have to chalk this one up as a loss and move on. That said, there is another workaround. If you win a match as the wireframes and somehow suppress the error your legitimate physical copy of the Super Smash Bros. Melee video game throws to your legitimate physical Nintendo GameCube home video game console, this happens. Obviously, there are still plenty of things wrong with this screen. The wireframes aren't present, there's an eerie silence due to the lack of victory music, and the game thinks Sheik had something to do with this whole mess. Even so, everything else is, remarkably, fine. You can advance past this screen and get back into the debug menu without any problems. This solution is neither ideal nor available to everyone who wants to mess around with the debug menu, but it's a possibility to consider. Before we move on to the next character, I have two minor things to address. First, I have to acknowledge the fact that the wireframes have no alternate costumes, for somewhat obvious reasons. They can use subcolors, however. Throwing a black or gray wireframe into the mix is one way to add some variety. Second, the wireframes' names can appear on Pokemon Stadium's Jumbotron. Sort of. Their names are listed as Zako Otoko and Zako Onna. Otoko and Onna are Japanese for man and woman, respectively. Zako, meanwhile, comes from the Japanese title shared by the Polygons, Wireframes, Alloys, and Miis, Nazo no Zako Teki Gundan, or Mysterious Small Fry Enemy Corps. For the record, that title is cool as hell. As far as I can tell, Zako is what translates to small fry. Man, whoever operates that Jumbotron is throwing some serious shade. They must not be too happy about the wireframes showing up somewhere they don't belong.
The sum of $3,000 will be paid to the terrifying, the deadly, the amazing
Fighting Polygon!
My name's the
Fighting Wireframe!
I don't care, get out. No, you got my name wrong. Get out there, you moron.
There's no featherweight division here, small fry. Next!
Cruel, but not entirely undeserved as far as the wireframes are concerned. All of the other non-standard fighters can use subcolors and have their names appear in Pokemon Stadium as well. And speaking of other non-standard fighters, GKOOPS is Giga Bowser. Conceived as a terrifying throwback to Bowser's NES-era design, he's an absolute beast as a playable character. He may move slow and he can't jump high, but this Kong's one hell of a... wait, that isn't right. Giga Bowser is basically every aspect of Bowser turned up to 11. He's a big, sluggish target, but he makes each of his attacks count, and has enough weight into armor to eat most of the damage that comes his way. I find him particularly satisfying to play because his moveset utilizes all 4 of Melee's elemental effects: fire, ice, electricity, and darkness. Giga Bowser is interesting because the game has a bit of a different reaction whenever he wins a match. Here's what happens if you suppress the related error.
This game's winner is Giga Bowser.
It triggers the announcer's Giga Bowser voice clip, which goes completely unused in the actual game. Well, besides an appearance in the wrong language's sound test. Seriously, what was up with that? Also, as you can see, Sheik's name has a red coloration normally used in the red team's results screen. That one's awfully surreal just because it has a much more evil kind of connotation. I imagine the developers tied the announcer's line to Giga Bowser just in case they wanted to, use him in classic mode under certain circumstances or something. And the red name is probably just a result of the game violently reacting in response to this whole messed up situation. Even so, this screen is oddly appropriate. I periodically wonder if Sakurai and the rest of HAL originally intended for Giga Bowser to have a victory screen for some reason. Maybe the single-player modes would have used them, or hell, maybe Giga Bowser would have been a super secret playable character or something. I'm virtually certain that those possibilities are nowhere close to true, but they're fun to think about. The only other notable thing about this screen is that it replaces Giga Bowser's stock icon with a target for some reason. And damn it, there we go again. 4 years later and I'm still harping on about stock icons. I really gotta learn to keep my mouth shut about these things. Giga Bowser is arguably the most normal character out of the entire set, just because he's Bowser times 10. So I don't have much more to say about him. Pokemon Stadium lists his name as G Bowser, which is kinda neat, but that's all I've got. Up next are MASTERH and CREZYH. As you can probably imagine, these two are pretty unconventional. Much like their boss fight implies, they're unable to move around freely and rely on flashy, scripted attacks. Because they have no control over their positions, the hands are outright unusable on some stages. They'll do their fancy introductory animation only to shove themselves into a wall or hang out just above the lower blast zone. I actually made a couple of videos about their various spawn points way back in 2015, so click on the card or one of the links in the description if you're curious and don't feel like testing everything out yourself. Actually, those videos might be due for a remake. I'll just change the links if I ever get around to that. The hands work remarkably well on the stages where they float at a reasonable height. They properly target the ground and interact with characters without just dragging them into the abyss. It's pretty neat how their code doesn't just fall apart whenever they clip into an unexpected platform or piece of geometry. While we're still on the topic of needlessly versatile code, I wanted to mention an interaction the hands have with Brinstar. If you defeat one of the hands on this stage, they'll do their normal defeat animation and fall into the background. But when they make contact with the lava, they'll take damage and restart that defeat animation over and over again until they escape beyond the skybox. That's obviously pretty weird. I don't know why the hitbox for the lava goes all the way back there and isn't just, restrained to the 2D playable plane. But I always thought this interaction was pretty neat, and I feel a sort of attachment to it because a long time ago, back in 2009, 2010, something like that, a separate YouTuber whose name I unfortunately can't recall made a video to demonstrate this after I asked them about it, and that was really cool of them, so I appreciate that, and I would like to think that my decision to include the information in this video is my way of paying that favor forward, so to speak. The hands use standard damage percentages, and are thus unkillable by default. To make them use stamina, you have to use a separate action replay code to convert the rule menu's rumble section into the flags section. Now, this menu is its own can of worms. You can set values from 0 to 255, and we are absolutely not covering that in this video. That is the problem for a future video and for a future version of myself. That said, I often get questions about how to make the hands use stamina and, therefore make them an actual fair and fun opponent to fight. So I wanted to address this portion of it in this video rather than keep you all in suspense until mid-2026 when part 3 of this series comes out. So, to do that, you'll want to set a slot's value from 0 to 1. And then you'll want to back out, go back through the Dironto menu, and use the damage set submenu to assign a value to a slot. And normally this, gives a character a normal damage percentage. But by setting the flag, the game converts that into stamina. And if I start the match real quick, you'll be able to see that. I forgot I had selected Master Hand, in all honesty. I thought I was going to spawn in as Link. Alright, so as you can see, Master Hand has 100 HP because I assigned value 1 to slot 1. And Mario is just normal, so he has a normal damage percentage. And with that, I think I've covered the hand's main quirks. You should be able to use them as opponents without much of a problem. Playing as the hands, however, is another matter entirely. Master Hand and Crazy Hand are notorious because players can only control them from the 3rd and 4th controller ports, respectively. Hey, random thought. If Classic Mode uses port 1 for the player and ports 3 and 4 for the hands, what happened to player 2? I wonder if they thought about implementing a co-op Classic Mode like the one in Smash for Wii U. That's baseless speculation on my part, so don't you dare turn around and try to state it as fact. I know there's somebody out there who will try. We've got a controller plugged into the 3rd port, so to speak, so Master Hand should be ready to go. I'll press A and... nothing. B? Nope. Control stick? Yeah, right. To control either of the hands, you have to press a direction on the D-pad in conjunction with A, B, L, R, or Z. I'll admit it sounds like total chaos at first. That said, there is a vague logic behind which attacks correspond to which buttons. A button moves send the hands into the background. B button moves are projectiles. And as you can see, you really don't want to use Crazy Hand's laser move if Master Hand isn't around. It's just going to crash the game. Z button moves are throws. L button moves make the hands move horizontally. And R button moves make them move vertically. SmashWiki has move lists on the hands' respective pages, and I highly recommend you use those as quick reference guides. Crazy Hand also has a set of moves tied to the Y button. These moves initiate a combo attack with Master Hand. If Master Hand presses Y plus up while Crazy Hand is doing this sparkly nonsense, the move will occur. Make sure Master Hand is around to accept the request, though. If you start a match without Master Hand and use one of these inputs, Crazy Hand will get stuck like this and essentially GBJ himself until his death, or, if he doesn't have stamina, the heat death of the universe. This doesn't happen if Master Hand is dead, since the game knows to check for a condition like that. It only gets confused when you start a match with Crazy Hand by himself, because that scenario isn't possible in the normal game. There are 3 combo attacks, although a 4th, unused one was discovered semi-recently. This clip was created by a YouTuber named Sushi. You should definitely take a look at their channel. They have some neat videos of melee mods and tweaks. One interesting thing I haven't mentioned is that certain items can affect the hands. They aren't able to pick anything up, which gets weird when you think about it, since they're, hands. But they can receive the effects of status-changing items. The items in question are the Super Mushroom, the Poison Mushroom, the Superstar, the Metal Box, and Lipstick. You don't normally get to see stuff like this happen because no items spawn when you fight the hands in Classic Mode or in Event Match 50. It's something fun to keep in mind if you feel like throwing the chaos of items into the mix. And obviously the hands can take damage from any items their opponents are using. The hands names in Pokemon Stadium are Master Hand and Crazy Hand, both formatted as one word. That's refreshingly straightforward. If you win a match with Master Hand and suppress the resultant error, the announcer will shout his name on the results screen.
This game's winner is MASTERH.
This is the second and final example of an unused voice clip appearing under these circumstances. Crazy Hand, much like the Wireframes, just gets awkward silence.
This game's winner is
Our final character of note is Sandbag, who is classified as a fighter in Melee. This adorable little fellow isn't supposed to do anything other than stand around, take hits, and get launched down a ridiculously long stadium. As a result, the vast majority of his moveset lacks animations and functionality. An attempt to perform a non-existent action will, in many cases, cause the game to crash. I went ahead and tested a few scenarios to see just how unstable Sandbag truly is. Note that Dolphin might be able to ignore certain errors more easily than a real GameCube, so Sandbag's stability may vary based on where you use him. That isn't to say I'm using Dolphin, of course. I'm playing my legitimate copy of Super Smash Bros. Melee for the Nintendo GameCube, available on sale nowhere, because it came out 20 years ago. Funny that. Anyway, Sandbag is obviously an expert at taking hits, so the game will happily accept whatever you throw at him. Movement and jumps, including mid-air jumps, seem to work fine as well. Much like the hands, Sandbag can receive the effects of status-changing items. Attempting to attack, perform an air dodge, or taunt will cause Sandbag to get stuck for a few moments. He should be able to wiggle right out of this state. Sandbag cannot be killed by passing a blast zone. He'll just plummet for all eternity. On the one hand, he's immortal. That's pretty handy. On the other hand, he prevents matches from ending and can, allegedly, crash the game if he falls for too long. Also, I recently noticed that he does this whoosh thing whenever he passes a blast zone. I don't know why that happens. It's kind of weird. Shielding and directional air dodges are off limits. These actions crash the game more often than not. I can occasionally manage to wave dash into the ground, but the game typically just gives up. I've also noticed that Sandbag's up special sometimes causes the game to crash, especially when he's off screen. I'm not sure why this move is so much less stable than the others. In other words, Sandbag is a time bomb. He has so few viable actions that a player or the AI will inevitably do something to crash the game. As a result, he isn't a viable character unless you're trying to make a Sandbag wins by doing absolutely nothing video or something. And on the topic of Sandbag winning by doing absolutely nothing, here's what happens when the game tries to render his results screen.
this game's winner is
Wait a minute, his name is Red. Giga Bowser is the only character whose name appears like that, and he's a bloodthirsty killer. Does that mean Sandbag is... Nah, he's too much of a sweetheart. Hell Laboratory reminds you that the sand-filled training bag will not threaten to stab you, and, in fact, cannot speak. Sandbag's name is formatted as Sandbag on Pokemon Stadium's Jumbotron. Overall, Sandbag is little more than an afterthought. When I was a kid, I thought it was cool that he was a playable character, but you just can't do anything with him. The debug menu has an entry for POPO, aka the lead ice climber. I guess POPO is a bit of a misnomer since you can technically play as Nana with the 3rd and 4th palette swaps, but we're getting into ridiculous semantics here, and who cares? This character's most notable appearance is the Ice Climber's target test, which serves as an homage to the NES game and, appropriately, only permits players to use the lead Ice Climber, much like that game's single-player mode. As an aside, this is one of my favorite target tests in the entire game. The juxtaposition of 3D renditions of 8-bit graphics against a modern and weird abstract background is super cool. POPO is just a widowed Ice Climber, so there isn't anything to discuss on the moveset front. In terms of oddities, Pokemon Stadium displays no name for this character. Somehow, the character closest to being playable is also the least recognizable as far as the Jumbotron is concerned. In a similar vein, Popo's victory screen runs into the same issues as Giga Bowser and company. The game throws a fit and tries to crash, which is interesting because this character is literally just Ice Climbers minus the AI-controlled Ice Climber. Forcing the victory screen to load will show the standard black screen, but the heading actually says Ice Climbers instead of Sheik like it normally does. At least somebody knows what's going on, I guess. The final listing in the CHAR select submenu is CH_none. Any attempt to start a match with this character, quote-unquote, will crash the game. This thing has garnered a surprising amount of attention for no discernible reason. Its name implies that it functions as a sort of empty slot. However, the Kind Select submenu determines which players exist in a given match and which ones don't. There isn't really a situation where you'll want to have an active controller slot filled with nobody. Honestly, I'm at a loss for what I should say about this thing. SmashWiki says the ID for this character is somehow tied to the random opponents in the 3 Trophy Tussle event matches, notably the only event matches that use random opponents, and maybe has something to do with how certain event matches allow you to select a character? The article isn't very clear, and I don't have the technical know-how to prove those claims or learn more about this. From a programming perspective, I guess it makes sense to have a default value for conditions that rely on a player's input or RNG or something else, but I thought default values were supposed to prevent crashes, not instantly trigger them. I'm not sure. If there's anything actually interesting about this thing, I'd love to hear about it. Finally, and as a somewhat minor aside, I wanted to go through the weird names included in this submenu and explain why I think they exist. Captain and Donkey are obviously Captain Falcon and Donkey Kong. I have to assume a lot of these abbreviations are just for, like, programming convenience, simplicity of typing names over and over again, making things memorable, that sort of thing. Fox, Game Watch, and Kirby are uninteresting. Koopa is Bowser's Japanese name. This internal name is consistent with Melee's Japanese language setting. Link, Luigi, and Mario are uninteresting. Mars is Marth. This is a romanization of Marth's Japanese name, Marisu. I'm not entirely sold on my pronunciation of that, so here's the Japanese Melee audience screaming his name. Yeah, that. Japanese doesn't have a TH sound, so the Su character takes its place. A direct conversion of Marisu, therefore, leads to Mars. For what it's worth, the English dub of the Fire Emblem OVA actually uses the Mars conversion.
I am Mars. Mars Lowell, heir to the throne of Aricia.
The son of King Cornelius? You are truly he?
Yes.
This OVA released in the late 90s, a few years before Melee gave Fire Emblem actual mainstream Western recognition. So a lot of stuff just wasn't set in stone. But imagine if that localization actually stuck.
Mars!
Now that's an alternate universe version of Melee I would love to play. Mewtwo, Ness, Peach, and Pikachu are uninteresting. Popo Nana, as I indicated earlier, are the names of the ice climbers. Pudding is Jigglypuff's Japanese name, also consistent with the Japanese language setting. Samus and Yoshi are uninteresting. ZE, Arrow, SE, and SE, Arrow, ZE are Zelda and Sheik, respectively. These names illustrate which character you start with and who they can transform into. So yes, this means you or an AI can start the match as Sheik. Those ASCII arrows make their names the most awkward of all, although I'm fascinated by how the transformation mechanic was so integral to the character's design that even some of the game's lowest level data reflects it. Falco is uninteresting. C-Link is Young Link. I guess the C stands for, could you hurry up and grab the Master Sword already, Link? In all seriousness, it probably stands for Child. Dr. Mario is uninteresting. Emblem is Roy. This name is basically the equivalent of referring to Samus as Metroid. I'm not exactly sure why Roy uses such a vague name. There used to be a rumor that the identity of Melee's second Fire Emblem character was, for a time, in flux, as the development team supposedly considered Leaf before they settled on Roy. According to Source Gaming's definitive list of unused fighters, however, there isn't any evidence for this claim. With that theory gone, I'm not sure how to explain this one. Maybe the guy who created all of the characters' slots just straight up forgot Roy's name. I mean, he hadn't even appeared in his own franchise by the time Melee came out, so honestly, can we expect anybody to remember who this guy was? Pichu is uninteresting. Ganon is the name of Ganondorf's beast form in the Legend of Zelda series, so the developers made the obvious decision to use it as shorthand. Master H is uninteresting. Boy and girl are, as we mentioned before, the male and female wireframes, very straightforward. GKOOPS is an abbreviated version of Giga Bowser. Honestly, that name's kind of cute, it's almost like a pet nickname. CREZYH is Crazy Hand, and I think this spelling is another romanization oddity. Crazy Hand's Japanese name is Kureiji Hando. These characters are Rei and E, which combine to form the equivalent of the stressed A sound in crazy. The Ray character was converted to RE instead of corrected to RA, because, in all honesty, what kind of loser would care about a single typo in a video game's code? Anyway, Sandbag is uninteresting, and POPO and none were just discussed. And with that, I think we've seen pretty much everything there is to see in the debug menu's CHAR select submenu. It was really fun to mess around with this stuff again. I've been away from the debug menu for quite a while at this point, as you can plainly see from my upload history. And yeah, I just had a good time setting up all the little clips that you saw and, you know, pulling the video together, even though the editing process was much more involved than I was anticipating. I once heard somebody use the rule of thumb that 1 minute of footage gets 1 hour of editing, and I don't think I quite hit that number, but I drew uncomfortably close. If you enjoyed the fruits of my highly arduous and back-breaking labor, then feel free to like the video. If you didn't like it, that's fine too. There's also a subscribe button down there somewhere, but I'll let you decide what you want to do with that. I have a few ideas for other videos I want to make about Melee, of course, and also various other obscure aspects of various Nintendo games, mostly from the GBA/GameCube/Wii era. What can I say, nostalgia is one heck of a drug. I have a couple of other videos that are definitely in the pipeline at the moment, but I don't have an exact ETA on when they'll be out. I've had to re-record my voiceover for this video, and even this outro, multiple times over at this point, so any production estimate that I could give you would just be horrifically wrong. Anyway, if the sort of stuff I cover on this channel sounds interesting to you, then by all means keep an eye out. Before we can finish up here, I did have a list of a few people/resources that I wanted to thank for helping me pull this video together. First of all, I wanted to explicitly thank Sushi for giving me permission to use their clip of Master Hand and Crazy Hand's unused combo attack in this video. That was very nice of them, and it helped to have, you know, a visual aid. Thank you to SmashWiki for being a comprehensive resource on all things Smash Bros. And I wanted to especially thank the wiki for having information on the various Japanese names of characters and other items within Melee. I took 2 years of Japanese in college, but I wouldn't have even known where to begin to start digging up that sort of information and translating it. In a similar vein, thank you to the cutting room floor for having a ton of information on Melee's debug menu and other hidden/cut/restricted content. It was really helpful to have a refresher on some of the things that I hadn't experimented with in a while, and just having, you know, a quick reference. Thank you to Source Gaming and the Fire Emblem Wiki for providing key pieces of research for the last bit of this video about characters' debug names. And finally, I wanted to thank all of those who came before me in this very specific niche corner of YouTube. I would not know nearly as much as I do about this thing, or how to navigate/learn more about it, if it weren't for all of the ancient camcorder off-screen tutorial videos that I watched back in, I don't know, 07 or 08. They were all really helpful, and they really inspired the imagination. So, thanks to everyone who was around at that time. Oh, and of course, thank you, dear viewer, for sticking around until the end of the video. That's the end of my list, so I guess I'll just leave you here and hope to see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.